Hello, I'm Alessandro Faraguna. I'm a third-year PPE student, so plus philosophy, politics, and economics. And today we're going to talk about a topic in economic research, which is the impact of religiosity on happiness. So what we're going to do is that we're going to treat these two abstract concepts metrically. So we'll see happiness as the independent variable, and which is composed of many variables that obviously affect it. So we can say job satisfaction, perceived relative income, gender, age, all these things contribute to happiness in some way or another. We're going to see if religiosity is one of these components, and if so, how strong a component it is. Probably you're asking yourselves, economic research and religiosity and happiness, how do these things relate? Well, let's start with happiness. So, interestingly, after the 2008 crisis, there has been a complete rethinking in economic research. So, before that, markets and the economy as a whole was based on various assumptions, such as consumer rationality and the fact that we're utility maximizers, and so we always make the rational choices. All these assumptions were put into questions when markets unraveled and huge parts of economic thinking was put into question. One sort of objective of economics before the crisis was maximizing GDP, so how strong an economy is, how much we produce, how rich we are. And so since that's the objective of all of those theories which rest on the assumption of consumer rationality, for example, now that those assumptions are not valid or in some way are being rethought, then obviously the objective changes too. And this is why we're tending towards a field of economics which is also very related to psychology and the fact that and how our minds work if they're not perfectly rational and if we're not perfect utility maximizing machines. So that's why we're looking at an indicator we have to in some way maximize, which is not now GDP, but it's something which is more related to psychology. And this, for example, has been happiness has been seen as one of the possible indicators of development and progress instead of GDP. The UN has recently created a ranking among all countries, and instead of sort of seeing GDP, so the US is first and etc., we're looking at happiness. So it's usually 15 variables ranging from infant mortality to hospital standards to life expectancy, gender equality, inequality, educational system, all these things combined to give us a number or a variable that hopefully captures the significance and the meaning of progress and development instead of GDP. And why religiosity? Well, that's a tougher question because obviously even if we do see that religiosity has an impact on happiness, how can economists and policymakers have a say in religiosity? How can they affect religiosity? Well, in some way they actually can, because, for example, in Italy, religion is an optional course taught at school. And why is this the case? Well, because in Italy, religion and culture, religion is so embedded in culture that the Ministry of Education has decided that if we want better educated citizens who are more cultured, then they'll have to know something about religion too. And so even if sort of this is an optional course, then if this will make someone better educated, maybe a better citizen, then obviously this is also related to economics and so should be of interest to economists. So what I'm doing here is seeing if religiosity is a component of happiness. So if religiosity has an impact on happiness. What does the previous literature say on this? Well, a professor called Charles Ellison, he looked at the impact of religiosity on happiness, but what did he use as the variable for religiosity? Because obviously, what is religiosity? What numbers, what values can we use for religiosity? What he did is that he based his study on a survey which asked the question how often you go to a place of worship, regardless of your religion. And so this was simply religious attendance. I'm sorry, New York can't see that. I hope they can. But so he just based religiosity on that. So what my paper is doing is that I'm challenging this indicator. So what I'm saying is that religious attendance isn't a good indicator for religiosity. So why? Well, simply because, for example, I can be extremely religious and still not go to sort of the formal gatherings or place of meeting in a temple or any place of worship, and still feel I am and still think I am profoundly religious. And according to certain religions, this is perfectly possible. But obviously, in the opposite case, sometimes we go to church, the mosque, or to any place of worship just because maybe our family, our culture, even our laws oblige us to do it. But deep down, we don't feel highly religious. And obviously, different religions require different levels of participation and attendance. So what we're doing here is that we're not using this as an indicator for religiosity, but we're using other questions. And first of all, we're using the question, how important is religion to you? And then, how often you pray. What I want to do here is to capture a more inner type of religiosity, and not sort of the formal gathering and going to the place of worship, but to see if you're actually religious sort of inside and you feel religious or not. And but then I still added religious attendance to capture the more formal aspect of religion. So how often you attend a place of worship. So since I didn't know which one of these variables affected religiosity the most, what I did is I simply weighed all these three variables together and used all these three as the indicator for religiosity. And what I did is that I looked at the impact on happiness. And to do this, I used a lot of so-called control variables. So I looked at, for example, age, gender, region. Obviously, I controlled for religious denomination, so Muslims, Christians, Jews, and other 32 variables that affect happiness, which are not religiosity. This is usually perceived relative income. So how much you earn, how much you think you earn compared to others. It's gender, hospital conditions. If you're married, if you have children, and age, definitely. And to see the real impact of religiosity without having the biasness these variables can create on religiosity, so then on happiness. And what I saw is that, surprisingly, the impact of religiosity on happiness is roughly zero, and is highly statistically significant. This is interesting, but then I thought this was linked too much to the previous literature. So what I did is that I tried to get to a further stage in this research and cut off all of these three variables I used earlier on, and I used two other indicators of religiosity, which I thought could actually capture this the impact of religiosity on happiness better. And that was how often you pray, instead of how often you attend a place of worship, and how important God is to you, or a God, or supranational entity, instead of religion. So maybe less of the formal part and more of the direct sort of spirituality part. And an interesting thing is that if I run these two variables as religiosity instead of these, I actually do get an effect, which is small but high significant. That's 0.1%, which in abstract terms means that for every percentage increase in religiosity, so if I increase my religiosity by 1%, which is strange to say, but please just bear with me a second, then the impact on happiness will be 0.1%, so a tenth of the increase of religiosity. So it's still sort of an increase. And that kind of makes sense. Why? Because here, if you look at what we're looking at here instead of here, if I ask someone how often they pray or how important God is to you, and sort of forget about the religion and all the political implications, or the even like the physical implications of the fact that there's the church and mosque, you have to go there and things like that. We do see that there is an impact. So probably what we're looking at here is that the impact of religiosity on happiness exists, but that's usually through sort of very inner spirituality. And then obviously I also added another one, which was how often how active you are in the religious community. And so that gave the 0.1%. And so probably that means that if there is an effect, it comes from the inner spirituality or the participation within a community. And that's probably because by participating for a common goal in some sense, so with people with similar values, with similar ideas, mindsets, we develop social bonds. And social bonds is usually known to then bring to friendship and thus to happiness. So probably that's the effect of religiosity on happiness, and not so much the formal going to church, going to a mosque, or how important religion per se is to someone. So that's what I found. So pretty much a zero effect if we look at the more formal part of religion, and a very mild effect if you look at sort of social bonds and the more informal parts. And now the problems. Well, these are sort of numbers which are highly debatable, obviously, because these are very abstract terms. And so 3 are the main issues, which are actually pretty big. And one of them is measurement problems. So obviously, this is all based on a World Values Survey, so it's 80,000 observations, so that's a lot. So that's good to sort of make inferences, but the problem is that it's all surveys. So what people asked here was simply, how religious do you feel from 1 to 5? And obviously my 3 can be your 5, and your 1 can be his 2. And so this is sort of the main problem because it's all subjective in a sense. Plus, another problem is the so-called social desirability bias. So if I have a certain view, I won't express maybe that one, but I'll tend to express the one that is closer to the more orthodox and conventional views that my culture, my laws, my country sort of wants me to say. Especially in countries where religion and the law and the state and politics are highly connected. So where, for example, following a religion is compulsory, attending a place of worship is compulsory. So we'll definitely have an upward bias in how religious people are. And then another problem is omitted variables. So the fact that I've looked at 32 variables here, plus religiosity impacting happiness, but all of us and all people around the world are different, and so happiness is determined by a lot of different things. And I ran a test, and there are omitted variables. So there is something else that is affecting happiness, which is not a control variable nor religiosity. But usually in economic theory, these 32 variables account for the vast majority of the impact on our happiness. And as Oswald says, this is usually happiness distills down to these main variables, regardless of your country, region, religion, etc. And finally, the last problem is reverse causality. What this is simply the fact that we're looking at how happiness is affected by religiosity, but what about religiosity being affected by happiness? So if I am religious and at one point in my life I'm happier for some reason, I might say that the reason for my extra happiness is the fact that I'm religious. What do? I become even more religious. And so I go back here. And by becoming more religious, and I might even get happier, so at that point I go on like this into a virtuous circle, which, however, for the papers is a vicious circle, obviously. And so what I'm capturing here is not only the first effect from religion to happiness. What I'm capturing here in this number or this number here is actually all these arrows added on one to another, which come obviously from the fact that this affects this, which affects this, which affects this, and this goes on and on. It's an endogenous problem. So these are sort of the main problems here, and I'm not saying that these coefficients are perfectly correct, true or anything, but I think that the problem is that in this new branch for economics, if we don't look at indicators such as GDP, as I talked earlier on, or for example, population density, so numbers that are certain, obviously what we're doing here is that we're just looking at perceived indicators. So I'm not actually looking at religiosity and happiness, I'm looking at perceived religiosity. So I'm just asking, how religious do you think you are? And you actually might be a 5 compared to everyone else, but you might think you're a 3, and same for happiness. So the problem here is that we're actually looking at perception and not real happiness. And this is actually a philosophical question, so, is perceived happiness happiness? Because in the end, what's important, some may say, is what's perceived. So if I think I'm happy, that's fine. If I'm not actually happy, who cares? Because if I think I'm happy, it's as if I'm happy. So this is actually kind of debatable. But in the end, this is the conclusion of the paper. However, obviously there are problems which relate to this new branch of happiness economics. Thank you.